Hello everyone! Today marks the first episode of my series on Gothic and Romantic literature here on YouTube, and the first episode is about one of the most famous stories from Germany, which is The Sandman by E.T.A. Hoffmann. And because I want to talk about this book today, I also created the makeup look that I'm wearing, which is inspired by the mechanical doll Olympia, who I'm going to talk about very soon. So the story was published in 1817 in a collection that is called The Night Pieces, or in German Die Nachtstück. And in the story we have the protagonist Nathanael, or Nathaniel, but I will call him Nathanael because it's a German story. And he writes a letter to his friend Lothar, and he tells him about the events from the past days and weeks, and he tells him that he has met a barometer seller in his university town where he studies, who wanted to sell him a barometer or a spyglass or something the like, and he was reminded of another man that he has met when he was a child, and he's called Coppelius, and the barometer seller is called Coppola. So he thinks that this might be the same person, and then he tells Lothar in the letter a story about his childhood, and he tells him that his father has always been visited by an advocate, I think, a big, little bit scary man who came only after the family had dinner, and he went to the office of the father with him together, and nobody really knew what happened, but it was always after the mother said, "Children, you have to go to bed because the Sandman is going to come." And so Nathanael never really knew what happened when the father and the advocate Coppelius left the children when they had to go to bed, and they were behind closed doors, and he never really knew what was actually going on. And then one day he asked I think the nanny of one of his sisters what was actually the meaning of the Sandman, and the nanny said, well, there's this story of a man who comes to pick the children's eyes and bring them for his own children to eat. And he was really afraid of that story, and Nathaniel made a connection between this story, this horrifying story of the Sandman, with the man who's visiting them, which is Coppelius. And so one day he hides in a wardrobe when Coppelius visits his father, and he sees that they're making some weird alchemistic experiments, and he gets discovered by Coppelius, and he is freaking out in a way, and after that Coppelius doesn't visit so often anymore, and the mother seems to be also scared of him, I think, and after a year, I think, the father even dies during an experiment they do together, the Coppelius and the father. And after that things change, and they move away, and Coppelius is never seen again at the family's house, so he doesn't really get into contact anymore. But now, as he is a student and he meets this barometer seller called Coppola, he's reminded of that man, and he's convinced that it's the same person because his name is even almost the same, and then he's also looking the same for him. So he's really freaking out, and the next letter we see that Clara, who is the girlfriend of Nathanael, got the letter, and she's the sister of Lothar. So the letter was addressed to Lothar, but it has been getting in the hands of Clara because Nathanael got the name wrong on the address, and Lothar and Clara live together. So Clara read about all these feelings and emotions of Nathanael, and she's really worried about him, and she says I think what you're experiencing is just like some kind of post-traumatic stress, and it's just all in your mind, and this Coppelius person is just like a bundle of fear and all your anger and all your bad emotions about the experiences of your childhood. And she advises him to just try to focus on the reality and what's going on in his real life. And after a while he apologizes Nathanael apologizes in another letter to Lothar about getting the address wrong, and he also tells him that he's now convinced that Coppelius and Coppola are not the same person, because he thought about it a little more, and also because there's a new physics professor called Spallanzani who came to town and who also speaks highly of Coppola, like the barometer seller. So he seems to be calmed down, and then he gets back to his hometown where he also meets Clara and Lothar, and everything seems fine. But then after a while he starts writing weird stories and pieces of literature that are, I think, also poems that are just where he reworks all that is in his mind and everything of the subconscious that he has to deal with in a way. But the stories he's writing, they are really, really very gloomy and not nice to read. So he always reads them to Clara, but she isn't interested in them at all. She's either bored or scared by them, and so their relationship gets worse and worse over time, because Nathanael doesn't understand that she doesn't want to hear about all these stories, and she just wants him to be the happy, normal person that he's been before. So after a while they reconcile and everything's fine again, and Nathanael returns to his university town, and he buys actually one of the barometers, or not a barometer, but a small telescope by Coppola, who visits him again, and he says he has pretty eyes to sell, which would be in the German version schöne Augen, and he thinks that's a little weird, but then he buys one of the telescopes, and he actually lives quite on the opposite side of the street to the house of Spallanzani, where he can watch Olympia through the window, and Olympia is the daughter of Professor Spallanzani. And he thinks she's a really beautiful woman, and he cannot believe how lucky he is that he gets to have a glimpse at her beauty through the window. But he also wonders why she's always just gazing into the same direction, and she's not like walking around the room or knitting, drawing, playing the piano, or something that one would expect of a woman during that time, just staying at home. And instead she's just staring into space, and she doesn't even smile or anything. But he doesn't even really see her so often. So after a while he's invited to a grand ball at the house of Professor Spallanzani, and he also sees Olympia there, who actually even sings and dances, and everybody is enraptured with her beauty. And at this point Nathanael falls for her completely, and he doesn't want to leave her side anymore. And after the ball he even visits her regularly, and he reads to her and talks to her, and she's always just saying ah, and he doesn't really know why she doesn't answer him properly, why she doesn't really talk to him, but she doesn't really question that. So he feels like he's been understood by someone for the first time, and that he has close connection to Olympia, although there's not really any connection, and she's not even a person, as he will find out soon. And he forgets about Clara, about his girlfriend, almost completely. So after a while he even decides he wants to marry her, and he wants to propose to her. And when he actually gets to the house of Professor Spallanzani to propose, he finds the professor together with the barometer seller Coppola fighting over the body of Olympia. And I think they are fighting about who made the eyes and who made the clockwork or something. And during that quarrel over the body, where you already see that it's not a real person they are quarreling about, the eyes, like Olympia's eyes, are falling out of the sockets and rolling around the floor. And like during the quarrel, Coppola manages to grab the body and run out of the house. So Spallanzani is left there with Nathanael, and Nathanael freaks out completely. And at this point, he finds out that it hasn't been a person that he's been falling in love with. So yeah, that's really weird, and that's like one of the peak points in the story. And he's even brought to an asylum because he has been freaking out at the house of the professor, and he's always been crying something like Feuerkreis dreh dich, Holzpüppchen dreh dich, which in English would be like fire circle, turn around, and wooden doll, turn around. And we really see that madness creeps over him completely here. So yeah, well, he's brought to the asylum, and I think Coppola isn't really seen anymore after a while, and Spallanzani can stay in town, but he also has to recover from the events. And before he has been a respected professor, but now everyone found out that he has fooled everyone by like creating that mechanical doll and making everybody believe that he really has a daughter, a living, breathing human being as a daughter, which wasn't true. So Nathanael actually recovers, and after a while he is reunited with Clara again, and he doesn't even think about the events before, and he doesn't think of Olympia anymore. So at a beautiful day, he's just going for an outing with Clara and Lothar together, and they climb a tower, and Clara says to him, "Oh, look over there, this little funny bush, what's that?" And then Nathanael takes out his telescope and wants to watch the bush through the telescope, but at the side of like his perspective, he also sees Clara, and as he sees Clara instead of Olympia, and he's reminded of all these moments before, he freaks out again, and he actually tries to throw Clara off the tower, which can only be provided by Lothar, who just climbs up the tower, and he manages to save Clara from the completely mad Nathanael. And in the final scene, Nathanael actually throws himself off that tower. And then we have like a very last few sentences where the narrator just says that Clara has been seen, and she looks happy, and she has a nice husband and children, so she is the one who obviously has managed to like live a fulfilled and happy life, whilst Nathanael has gone mad. And I had forgotten to mention that he even was convinced that he saw Coppola walking around like down the street when he was looking through the telescope down from the tower. So he was also going mad because of that, I think. And the story is really, really interesting because there's so many different layers, and I think you could talk about it for hours on end. I just want to mention what I really found interesting about it. I think it's really interesting that it's not so... it's not really a gloomy story, and it's also not really creepy. I think it's a little terrifying, especially the scenes in his childhood, and also like all his memories. You never really know what has been happening, and we have an unreliable narrator, so we don't really know what's really going on, whether all of this was just happening in his imagination or whether it really happened, and who is who in the story. And the ways in which he goes mad. That's really so interesting. So yeah, I really recommend reading the story. And I think I also really like that the story, I think in a way E.T.A. Hoffmann tries to rework some of the principles and elements of the Romantic literature, and he doesn't ridicule them, but I think he gives them a very nice twist. So for example, we have this idea that the romanticists, they romanticize everything in life, and like art, for example, is very important for them, and it's even more important than real life sometimes. So when Nathanael tries to work as an artist in a way, when he creates these pieces of literature and nobody appreciates them, he is almost a failed artist. So he is a failed person in a way, and in the end he even dies, and this death seems so unnecessary, and it's a little disappointing, I think, in a way, because you always, during the story, I thought, like when I was reading the story, I thought maybe Nathanael can have a happy end as well, because there's quite a few stories that really try to have a happy end. You will see that in the other videos I will make, that most of the stories actually try to have a happy end, but it's not always working out, of course. And here we have a happy end, at least for Clara, but not for Nathanael. Yes, and I really liked this, the way like E.T.A. Hoffmann was working with all the material he had and all the elements he has been putting into play really, really well, I think. So it's not too much of anything, and that's what I really like. So it's really, it feels carefully composed. Also, like the way the story is structured. First you have these different letters, you get the different perspectives of the, like Lothar, Nathanael and Clara, and then you jump from the past back to the present time, and you hear about all these events going on, but you never really know what's really happening. And then we have Olympia as a figure, and it's also funny how E.T.A. Hoffmann describes the way that society reacts when they find out that Olympia is not really a human being but rather a doll, because actually several young and even older gentlemen, they are a little afraid whether their own wives or girlfriends are real human beings. So they ask them, for example, to engage in conversation more deeply and to give more complicated answers, or to sing and dance something that is a little bit like lascivious, I think, and something like that. So things that like a doll wouldn't be programmed to do. And yeah, it's really, really interesting to see how like everyone has been held for a fool by Spallanzani, and that's really interesting as well. So the story is also has quite a few very funny elements, and that's also something I liked a lot. You can interpret it in 1,000 different ways. Probably, I think Nathanael is schizophrenic in a way, so that's some way you could explain it, but the kind of madness is not easy to tell. I don't know much about that. You could also go and interpret it with Freud, who has said that I think all these, like especially the symbol of the eyes, like the skyne oke, the pretty eyes, and the eyes being stolen by the Sandman, and the eyes of Olympia falling out, that it's I think the fear of the castration fear of Nathanael that is expressed here. It's a little more complicated what Freud says, but It's interesting to read as well. So if you're interested in psychoanalytic interpretations, have a look at Freud for that. I just wanted to introduce the story to you if you haven't read it yet. It's worth it even if you know what's going on. I read it in school first, and I think I was really... I found it a lot scarier than I found it these days. So when I reread it last week, I didn't really find it scary anymore, but rather funny and interesting, and I found a lot more different elements to think about. If you have read it, comment below how you like the story and whether you like anything else by E.T.A. Hoffmann as well. And if you haven't read it, you can also tell me whether you want to read it, and I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next video on episode 2 of my Gothic and Romantic Literature series. Bye bye!